Hi, I'm Gavin Carlson, and this is Out of Bounds, Daily Bruin Sports Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Out of Bounds, the official sports podcast of the Daily Bruin. As always, I'm your host, Gavin Carlson, a fourth-year sports staff writer here at the Daily Bruin, and today it's just the duo. No Joseph today, but hey, we don't need him. We've got the one and only Jack Nelson, a senior sports staff writer here at the Daily Bruin with the best hair in the game. Jack, how are you doing today, buddy?
I am doing awesome. Gavin, got to write my first ever football wrap yesterday. It was a surreal experience, and it's been a great day so far. How are you doing?
Ooh, look at that. Someone asked me how I'm doing. I'm doing great. My Saints play tomorrow. Just a humble plug to any of the New Orleans Saints fans out there. But yeah, shout out to Jack. He mentioned it. I got to experience it 2 weeks ago when UCLA played Coastal. Jack had it this past Saturday. It's real cool to be in the press box at the Rose Bowl. So obviously both of us very grateful for those opportunities. Shout out to the Daily Bruin as always. And shout out to our camera lady as always, Zoë Busenberg, behind the cameras, the 3 cameras, giving you this amazing video experience. As always, make sure you check out the YouTube channel, UCLA Daily Bruin, to look at our beautiful faces and continue listening on all the podcasting platforms as well. But enough of the plugs, enough talking about us. Let's talk about UCLA football because my goodness, what a performance yesterday. We are recording on a Sunday, and UCLA on a Saturday had one of the most impressive performances I think we've seen in a while. 59-7 over NC Central. Obviously not the strongest opponent, but to be able to do what they did, 2 touchdowns in like the first minute of the game. I think they said the highest scoring first quarter ever in the history of the program, and I think it was the biggest overall win since 2012, if I read that correctly. I don't think we need to go through every touchdown. You guys watched the game, but Jack, what were your overall takeaways from what was just a dominant performance from start to finish from UCLA?
Yeah, everyone's been talking about the quarterback competition all year long. The question is, is it Dante? Is it Colin? Is it Ethan? But we know it's Dante's team at this point in the season. I think we can comfortably say that after this game. But this game wasn't really about passing for UCLA. It was very much about the running game. He had 404 rushing yards of 614 total yards. That is an unreal amount of rushing yards. That's mad numbers right there. And so it was really interesting just to be able to see UCLA use a bunch of its different weapons in the backfield that we don't normally see. I think they had 5 different players with at least 50 yards on the ground. We got to see a lot of Anthony Atkins, too, which was interesting, with someone who we really have not seen that much of this season. It's mainly been TJ Harden, Carson Steele, those kind of conventional running backs. And, of course, Anthony Atkins is a much different guy. He's from Army. He's more of a bigger back. Traditionally a fullback before he came to UCLA. But he kind of had a breakout game. I think he had 96 yards on 10 or so carries, so he had a big game. But yeah, it was really about the running game for UCLA.
Yeah, like you said, Anthony Atkins, the leading rusher actually for UCLA with those 10 carries for 96 yards. But just some of the yards per carry numbers, ridiculous. Anthony Atkins, 9.6, and that was actually the 4th best on the team. Carson Steele, 5 carries, 83 yards, 16.6 a carry. Obviously, he had a couple of huge rushes, the longest being a 42-yard run. TJ Harden, he seems to have a big rush every game. He had a 62-yard carry, finished with 5 carries for 68 yards, 13.2 per carry. And then Colson Yankoff, who is not really a big play guy, short yardage runner. He kind of showed it off himself. He had a 25-yard carry. Overall, 6 carries, 61 yards, 10.2 yards a carry. So, like you said, a dominant performance from the run game. And, it's really been the identity of this Chip Kelly team, especially in the last couple of years. But I think we've been talking about a lot how it's going to be interesting to see, is it, 2 running backs, 3 running backs, 4 running backs? Is there Colin Schlee thrown in the mix as well? Last year, we were so used to it being Zach Charbonnet with the occasional Kaz Allen carry, the occasional Keegan Jones. But to see such a balanced attack, that's something that's going to be a strength of this team going forward. The defense as well. They had a shutout basically until the end of the game. And once again, we're not going to read too much into maybe some of the stats. And like you said, it was really mad numbers. But just what did you see from the defense? I know one thing that stuck out to me, we talked about the front 6 or front 7 being great in terms of the starters, but being able to see the depth, being able to see backups go in there and get pressure on the quarterback, being able to see, the front 4 just be in the backfield at will all game long. That's what you want to see from UCLA against a FCS team that's not very strong up front. But I think looking forward to Utah, which we're going to talk about for most of this episode, I think that's going to be the difference, is the front 7. I guess who stood out for you the most, or I guess who has surprised you the most, not only in that game, but so far in that front 7, front 6? We know about Law too. We know about Muasau, but just maybe who's the X factor that's performed the best so far, in your opinion?
Honestly, for me, I don't know if it really comes down to one player from what I've seen. I think in this game, as you mentioned, this was just because it was such a dominant, performance from UCLA's offense that really most of the starters for the defense kind of came out of the second half. There was a lot of players we hadn't seen before come out in the second half and really get some playing time there. But yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, I think this is it's a very deep defense. We've talked about the defensive front, how strong that front seven has been for them. But I think, obviously it's against an FCS opponent. It's against an offense that really wasn't going to do much against UCLA, even with their starters in the game. But I think, this is just a very deep defense. It's a defense that is well coached. I think Dante and Lynn is starting to make an impact. We've seen, I think, seen the secondary improve throughout these first few games. They've forced a lot of turnovers, which is something to keep an eye on, especially as we gear up for Pac-12 play coming up next week. But I think for the defense, though, I don't think it really comes down to one player in particular, at least not from what I saw last night or last afternoon. But yeah, I think it's just a very deep team, and it was interesting to kind of see that kind of come through against a team like this.
Yeah, dominant performance, both sides of the ball. We'll transition now. UCLA is 3-0, obviously. There's plenty of debates about what the strength of their schedule was overall. I think people really underestimated that Coastal Carolina team. That's not a bad team. They've historically been a team that's snuck into the top 25 rankings occasionally. So people are sleeping on that when San Diego State, a strong rushing team, a strong rush defense team, and UCLA did both of those things well. They ran the ball well. They stopped the run well. So I think UCLA has made statements despite not playing a ranked opponent yet, not playing, an SEC team or anything like that, or even a Power 5 team, to be honest. But now we transition to week 4 because there's no debate about this upcoming opponent. UCLA opens Pac-12 play against arguably the big dog of the Pac-12. They've been the big dog, the defending Pac-12 champs 2 years in a row. Obviously, USC is the highest ranked team in the Pac-12 right now. But Jack, is Utah still the king of the Pac-12 until someone throws them off that perch?
Absolutely. We've talked about USC, just the amount of difference that, Lincoln Riley has made over there with Caleb Williams. They're probably the closest team to Utah right now, maybe better than them. We'll see what happens if those two teams square up this season. I don't know off the top of my head if they're actually going to be playing each other. But yeah, I think Utah, they're the top dog until someone knocks them off. I'm kind of a believer in that sort of philosophy. So yeah,
they've been the top dog, and it's usually because of two things. Their overall defense has been fantastic, really since Kyle Whittingham's been there, but especially in recent years. And really, they control the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. They love to run the ball. They've had a great quarterback the past 2 years, the Pac-12 championship player of the game in Cam Rising. And the big question is whether or not we're going to see Cam Rising in this game at Rice-Eccles Stadium. Rice-Eccles Stadium. Did I get it right? Is it Reese or Rice?
Rice-Eccles.
It is Rice-Eccles. Who knows? But they'll be in Salt Lake City. The question is, will Cam Rising be playing in Salt Lake City? We've seen very mixed performance from Utah's pass attack with Nate Johnson in the recent game against Weber State. They did win 31-7, but minimal performance from the passing game. If it is not Cam Rising, is UCLA the favorite in this game? I think UCLA is a 5-point underdog right now with us not knowing who's going to play. But if UCLA is going up against Nate Johnson and not Cam Rising, is UCLA the favorite in this game?
I think yes. I will say UCLA is the favorite in this game. That being said, this is one of the toughest environments to play in college football. They're going to one of the stadiums where the crowds are really riled up, and this is it should be an afternoon game, not an evening game, but it will be a tough environment to play in. That's always a tough stadium, Rice-Eccles. But yeah, Nate Johnson, he had a pretty decent game against Weber State, not really anything flashy. Obviously, they want to have Cam Rising in that position. But even if they do put Cam Rising out there, I still think UCLA has a better chance, and maybe the bettors and all the analysts are giving them the benefit of the doubt or whatever they're saying right now on all those media sites. But I think it comes down to the fact that if it's Cam Rising or not, UCLA can really, it's going to be a tough game for him. And I think, with Cam Rising, it's just, there's so much we don't know. He literally has not played a football game since January against Penn State in the Rose Bowl. And him coming back from torn ACL, one of the hardest injuries to come back from in sports, and not having these past few games to kind of get comfortable with this offense and really, get ready for this kind of matchup against a much better defense. And so I think UCLA will have a much better chance if it's Nate Johnson. I think that's kind of a given, but still will be a tough environment to play in regardless.
Yeah, just looking at some of the numbers, in terms of UCLA and Utah, how they match up. And there's going to be all sorts of asterisks put on these stats given the matchups. Obviously, Utah had that season opening game against Florida, probably the best opponent that either team has played in their first 6. But if you look, the biggest separation is really UCLA's offense, specifically in the air, through the air compared to Utah. Overall, UCLA tied for 20th in the nation with 40.3 points per game. I mean, they just put up 59 against an FCS team. So, once again, asterisk there, but they've looked strong. Dante Moore obviously doing his thing so far. Meanwhile, Utah just tied for 87th, only 25 points per game. They really underperformed in that second game against Baylor, and I think that's kind of what cancels out some of these, question marks about who they played, and they played Florida. They underperformed against Baylor, and even 31 points against Weber State is not eye-opening. So I think Utah's offense has left a lot to be desired. But really, like we said, Utah's always been a team that controls the line of scrimmage. The rush offense and rush defense is always strong. This year, though, UCLA better at both aspects so far. UCLA top 3, third in the country, 270 yards per game on the ground. We talked about all the weapons they have there. Utah 39th, 186.7 yards per game. And then even in the rush defense aspect, UCLA, I misspoke. Utah is just slightly better. UCLA tied for 11th, 69.7 yards allowed per game on the ground. Utah allowing 65. So it's kind of similar to the San Diego State matchup for UCLA in terms of you're playing a team who's great on the line of scrimmage, great front seven, but so is UCLA. It's really two teams where their strengths aligned. They're playing against each other's strengths. And so obviously, usually that means who's going to win that battle, right? If two teams are good at running the ball and good at stopping the run, who's going to win that battle? And then who's the X factor in the quarterback position on both sides? If it is Cam Rising, is Dante Moore still the edge for UCLA? Is he a better quarterback than Cam Rising at this point? Because if it comes down to the run game's canceling out and it comes down to the two quarterbacks, and if we assume Cam Rising is there against Dante Moore, does UCLA have the edge, or are you still giving the nod to Cam Rising?
I'm definitely still giving the nod to Cam Rising if he's in the game, and it's Dante on the other end. I mean, ultimately, Dante, he is a freshman. He has never played against a Pac-12 opponent before. Utah will be quite the first test for him. It'll be a big challenge to go in there and try and get the win with UCLA. But Cam Rising is just such an experienced quarterback in this kind of like tight position against teams like this. He's back-to-back. He was with Utah for both these Pac-12 championships,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So he's been a very dominant force for that offense, and he's been so consistent when he has been in there. Obviously, now without him, there's been a lot of questions, but Utah's still 3-0 without him. They're still a good team at this moment. Even, as you said, playing against Florida, it's a big win for them, especially with Florida knocking off, I think, what was Tennessee yesterday?
Yeah, they just beat Tennessee.
So that's a big win for them as well.
Yeah.
So that win looks better for Utah now.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think Cam Rising still has the edge over Dante. It'll be interesting to see how Dante responds to such a much better defense in Utah, right, and how he's able to maybe he'll probably challenge him to go to some receivers that he's maybe not as used to going to. Maybe they'll eliminate Sturdivant from the passing game, or maybe they'll force UCLA to go to the rushing game more. We'll see what will happen. But I think ultimately, yeah, Cam Rising still has the edge there.
Well, guess what? You might have Cam Rising over Dante Moore. I do as well. Okay, I'm not going for the hot take yet. Dante has to do it against a strong defense, like you said. Don't want to disrespect Cam Rising, who, like we said, has won 2 championships, was in the Rose Bowl. But I think the real question is if it's an 80% Cam Rising versus a healthy Dante Moore. I think maybe I do give the nod to Dante Moore. I think I give the nod to Dante's weapons over Utah's weapons. J. Michael Sturdivant, probably the best wide receiver on the field for either side. I know Utah has McMillan, the USC transfer, and he's an interesting player for sure. But I think it's one of those rare cases where I think everyone remembers the UCLA game against Oregon last year and how UCLA is having one of the best seasons it's had in so long, and they go to Autzen and they're outmatched talent wise, and even when UCLA beats Utah, it's like they kind of won at home. Zach Charbonnet kind of carried. Is UCLA really as talented as Utah? Blah blah blah. I think this might be the rare time where you could say UCLA's roster overall might be a more talented roster than Utah's, especially with how they've played so far. And so then that's kind of what I want to transition into now is looking at UCLA's roster, asking a few question marks about who the starters are. I know we've debated, that we talked about the secondary on the last episode. John Humphrey officially got the start over Devin Kirkwood in the last game. I don't want to say that I called that, but I don't know. We kind of all talked about it. I had Kirkwood higher than Humphrey on our depth chart or whatever, our rankings, but I think Humphrey has passed up Kirkwood. I think we finally know a little bit more about the roster overall, but in terms of our segments. We know people love our segments. I'm going to start with a little buy or sell. People enjoyed that one. So we talked about the run game. In this upcoming game against Utah, buy or sell, Anthony Atkins is going to have a legitimate role for the Bruins, or are they just going to go back to TJ Harden and Carson Steele, and that Atkins performance was kind of a, just a fun game against NC Central? Buy or sell, Anthony Atkins?
I'm going to buy, actually. I'm riding the Anthony Atkins hype train a little bit, just because I was there in person and kind of a little bit. So I was very focused on his performance because I think he really just had a great game against NC Central yesterday. But I think obviously, TJ and Carson, they lead this backfield. They're two, as I mentioned earlier, two very conventional running backs in college football these days. And Anthony just kind of brings a whole new dimension to that backfield. I think that's one thing that the UCLA coaching staff probably realized after this game is that when you put him in the game, you get someone who maybe is not the most agile, the most fast running back like Carson TJ bring to the game. You have someone who's just a very hard guy to take down in the open field. He sheds a lot of tackles. He gets a lot of yardage from beyond the line of scrimmage. And so I think because of what he showed yesterday against NC Central and the kind of new dimension he adds to the backfield a little bit, I think we could see his usage definitely go up against Utah this weekend.
I don't like disagreeing with you, Jack, because I love you, but I'm going to disagree with you. I'm going to sell it. I think it was a great story. It was a great performance, but just looking at the season so far in the two close games to start the season, Atkins did not have a carry against Coastal, and against San Diego State, I believe he had 5 carries for 26 yards. I mean, is he going to touch the ball? Yes. Is he going to get 3 to 4 carries? I'd say so. I think especially in that, whatever you want to call that formation with 3 running backs behind Dante in short yardage situations. We've talked about that on this podcast, how there's so much potential for what Dante Moore can do, handing the ball off to Carson Steele or Yankoff or Atkins in that formation. So does Atkins get 3 or 4 carries? Yes. Does he have 8 or 9 or 10 like he did against NC Central? I don't know. It's just such a big game, and I think you're going to want to lean on your 2 workhorses. But hey, if I'm wrong and Jack's right, I feel like people are going to be happy about that. He's got me beat in the hair game. I feel like he's got me beat in the fan favorite game as well. So I'm sure just because I said that, people will want Anthony Atkins to do well. I'm messing around. But we'll go to another buy or sell. This is, I don't know. I've been thinking about this. Buy or sell, is Chip Kelly a better coach than Kyle Whittingham?
Whoa, I was not expecting that one. No, Kyle Whittingham's a better coach than Chip Kelly. At the collegiate level, it's easily Kyle Whittingham. You're thinking about like how much he has built at Utah, how long he's been the coach there. What is it, like since the early 2000s he's been at Utah, right? He's been a long time in that program. And just the way he's built it up and had so much success these past few years, and maybe not turn into bowl success in the case of the Rose Bowl, with Utah losing the previous 2 Rose Bowls. They've been in still getting back-to-back Rose Bowls at Utah, where historically that team has not been, a huge Pac-12 contender. That's pretty impressive. And I think, Chip deserves a lot of credit for the work he's done with UCLA, just starting with basically nothing and having a really rough first few seasons and going through all the criticism and everything and still getting a lot of fair criticism, I guess, maybe for just now getting over, I think 500. He's with UCLA. He's now 30-29 all time at UCLA with that win over NC Central. But yeah, I think Kyle Whittingham is definitely a better coach than Chip Kelly, at least the collegiate level.
I'll be honest. I kind of threw that question in there more so to be able to talk about Chip Kelly. I'm gonna sell as well. I've got Kyle Whittingham over Chip Kelly as well. Accomplishments wise, I think, I don't think it's really that much of a debate. But I do want to use this moment to talk about Chip Kelly a bit because we know how much criticism he's got since he's been in Westwood, and for good reason. The first couple of seasons were quite embarrassing, losing records, getting blown out at home to Oklahoma, basically losing every game in the conference against any respectable opponent. But if you really put into context now these last, season and a half, what he's been able to do. Last season, he surprises everyone when he beats Utah, and I feel like people forget about that Utah game. We had number 11 Utah come to the Rose Bowl, play number 18 UCLA. Question marks about whether that 18th ranking was legit for UCLA. Hadn't earned a huge win yet, quote unquote. They had beaten Washington, but 42-32 was the final score. They really dominated that game. DTR obviously was a superstar all season and in that game. But once again, I talked about it earlier in the episode. Last season, UCLA's roster was not Utah's roster, and they still won that game. So Chip Kelly deserves credit for probably outcoaching Kyle Whittingham in that game last year. And now, like I said, there's a legit argument that can be made that he has a better roster or a very similar roster to Utah this year. So who says that in a single game, Chip Kelly can't be the better coach like he was probably last year. Obviously, you win the game when you have a lesser roster. You're the better coach. So, yes, Kyle Whittingham is a better coach than Chip Kelly, but no, I don't think it's as wide a gap as people might think when they hear the two names compared. I know a lot of people are going to have something to say about that. Chip Kelly's probably the most polarizing name in Los Angeles, arguably. So, but that's just my opinion. I want to go to predictions now. Like we said, UCLA is, as of now, on this Sunday, a 5-point underdog. As of now, we have no idea who's going to be the quarterback for Utah. How do we want to do this? Do we want to do a if Cam Rising plays score prediction? Do we want to do a if he doesn't and if he does? Or do you just want a flat prediction and maybe you add context about who you think is going to play quarterback for Utah? How do we want to do this?
Let's do a flat prediction, and then we can add context if we want.
Okay, well, you go first then. Flat prediction, and then tell me in your prediction, did you have Cam Rising playing?
All right, I am going to give it to Utah in this one. I have Utah winning, let's go with 28-21. Earlier this season, I had Utah winning this game before seeing the sample size of these previous 3 games for UCLA. I'm going to stick with that. I think that we actually will see Cam Rising, though not for the full game. I think he's not at the level that he needs to be where he can comfortably play a full game of football and still feel, like he's not going to have to go back to the bench for a while when he comes back off the sideline. So I think, just with him coming back from an injury like that, we're only going to see some of him, but it'll be like enough for Utah to still win this game over UCLA. And I'll say this, I think it's going to be closer than I initially thought early this season, just because UCLA has shown us a lot with their defense and the way they can operate with offense, under Dante Moore, under center. So we'll see what happens, but I do have Utah with the edge.
28-21, you said?
Yes.
And with Cam Rising half playing, half not playing. I think that's actually interesting what you said about his, how much he does play, because he does have kind of a completely different skill set to Nate Johnson, to where you kind of can, have both out there and present a different look for the UCLA defense. We know historically, I don't know if there's any stats to back this up, but I feel like people would agree. Historically, UCLA has struggled against quarterbacks who can move around. You think about guys like Jake Haener and Jaden DeLoyer pulling off crazy upsets at the Rose Bowl because they can run around. Daniels, when he was at Arizona State, did the same thing. So there's kind of a history of UCLA struggling against mobile quarterbacks. And so, if Cam Rising, who in his own right is kind of a mobile quarterback, he won't be if he does play with, everything he's coming back from. But Nate Johnson, change of pace. Maybe he gets 2 drives, Cam Rising comes back in, and then maybe if it's the fourth quarter and it's a close game, then you have Cam Rising run, play the majority of the remainder of the game. I wouldn't be surprised. That's a good call, that they can really alternate and kind of present different looks. We'll go to my prediction. I, like you, had Utah beating UCLA in Salt Lake City when we did our full season predictions, but I have changed my pick. Call me a believer. I don't know what you want to call me. Like I said, I think Dante Moore is probably a better quarterback than an 80% healthy Cam Rising or a Cam Rising, Nate Johnson duo. Heck, UCLA has their own duo. Chip Kelly seems to love him some Colin Schlee. Preferably just the legs, though. I think he threw 4 passes, and one of them was a pick against an FCS team. So let's just stick to the legs for Colin Schlee. But I think Dante Moore is better than a not fully healthy Cam Rising. I'm going to keep saying it. I think the roster is closer to even. UCLA might even have a better front seven. We know I think I saw a stat that they had the highest pressure rate per game in all of Power 5. That defensive line is legit. And the environment will be interesting. We'll see how Dante Moore handles it with him being a freshman. But I've got UCLA winning this one very close, 27-24. 2 defenses that are going to keep the offenses very limited. But I think a couple big plays. That's the main thing. UCLA has shown the ability to score points on big plays. So even if the environment's tough, even if third downs are not being converted, even if there's a turnover or 2, in the blink of an eye, Dante Moore can complete a pass to J. Michael Sturdivant. He had a 30-yard touchdown on Saturday. We had the big one in week 1. So I think just with the big playability that UCLA has that Utah does not have, I'm giving UCLA the edge, 27-24. But it's gonna be a great game regardless. So I think that's gonna do it for today's episode. We've got our predictions. UCLA, Utah, a huge game. Number 11 Utah hosting number 22 UCLA. If UCLA wins this game, where do they fall in the AP rankings going into the next week?
I think we could see a top 15 entrance for UCLA, honestly.
I totally agree. 4-0. You've really looked strong in all 3 games and maybe just haven't played good enough teams to be in the top 20 yet. But if you beat Utah in Utah, regardless of who's playing quarterback, that's a top 15 football team. If they lose, they fall out of the top 25 most likely. But yeah, that'll do it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. As always, we really appreciate the viewership, especially if you got to the end, then you are a loyal viewer, and we appreciate you for that. Like this episode and every episode, you can check us out on UCLA's YouTube channel, UCLA Daily Bruin YouTube channel. And also, if you want to just listen to the audio version, if you for some reason don't want to look at that amazing hair, I don't know why you wouldn't want to look at that amazing hair.
Come on, I know you want to look at this hair.
Absolutely. But if you don't, for whatever reason, you can listen on Spotify, on SoundCloud, on Apple Podcasts. As always, a transcript of this episode and every episode is available at Daily Bruin's website, dailybruin.com. And make sure you stay on the lookout for all of our coverage throughout the week. You know, we're going to have Joseph in Salt Lake City covering the game for the Daily Bruin. But just all of our midweek coverage. We've got previews, scouting reports, notebooks throughout the week. We're going to be scouting Utah. I'm going to be excited to do that. But please support our articles. We put a lot of work in for those. We put a lot of work in for this podcast as well. Jack, any closing statements?
As you said, we're always cooking. We always got content coming out. So keep an eye on the Daily Bruin website. And we just have, I will say this. There's now a Daily Bruin Sports Instagram. Just went up this week. Make sure to give that a follow. Share that with all your friends. Helps share our content. It helps us get some visibility. We would really, really appreciate that. So definitely give that a look.
That is a perfect plug. I totally forgot about that, and I don't normally give you a last statement, but what a time to give a last statement. Perfect. Follow us on Instagram as well. Thank you so much for watching UCLA versus Utah this upcoming Saturday. We can't wait. Take care. We'll see you next time. So long.